So today we are going to solve equations that involve absolute value. So I have up here the absolute value of 4. Well, the absolute value is the distance from 4 to 0 on a number line. So the absolute value of 4 is just 4 spaces to 0. So that's what it is. Now, if I add the absolute value of negative 4, again, that's just the distance from negative 4 on the number line down to 0. So if I write out those numbers that go all the way to 0, I would have 4 spaces. So the absolute value of 4 is 4 spaces. Well, the absolute value of negative 4 is also 4. Well, we get a little bit more complicated in this class because what we're going to do is we're going to try to solve for x when it's inside some absolute value bars. So let's take a look at this first problem here. Let's say we had the absolute value of x equals 6. So what we want to do is we want to find the number or numbers x could be when we take its absolute value, it equals 6. Well, one of those numbers, well, it would just be 6 itself, because the absolute value of 6 equals 6. And the other number, well, you guessed it, is negative 6, because the distance from negative 6 to 0 is also 6 units. So the two values that x could equal are negative 6 and 6. So sometimes the problems get a little bit more difficult if we place an extra number inside the absolute value bars. So let's say we had the absolute value of x, and then we add a number to it, like 2 equals 4. So remember, we're not trying to find the value of x that equals 4. We're trying to undo this equation first and then find the value of x that equals what we have it set equal to. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to solve for the absolute value. So we want to remove this 2 from this left side and move it to the right. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to do opposite operations. We're going to take 2 away from both sides of the equal sign. And when we do that, it'll cancel out those 2's on the left-hand side. And what we're left with is, on the left-hand side, is the absolute value of x. And this absolute value of x equals not 4 anymore, but only 2. 2 because 4 minus 2 makes 2. So from this point, now we can find those two values x can be. So x could either be the positive 2 or the negative 2. So we can write that just in either order. Now sometimes, since we have more than one number, sometimes we have a set of numbers, so sometimes we use some braces to represent the answer. So oftentimes they'll use these braces that look like this, and they represent this as what we call a solution set. So that is our solution set, 2 and negative 2. Those are the two values of x that when we place them in this absolute value bar, take its absolute value, add 2, we get positive 4. Well, we can try another type. Let's move on to number 3. And let's try this time putting a number in front of the absolute value. So let's try a 2 times by the absolute value of x, about a minus 4 this time, equals 6. So again, what we want to do is we want to isolate this absolute value. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to remove this negative 4 by adding 4 to both sides. And so if we add 4 to the left side, we also have to add it to the right side. So once we've done that, we still have this 2. And we still have the absolute value of x, but we no longer have this 4 because it cancels out because we added 4 to both sides. But on the right side, we have to add 4 to the 6, and we end up with 10. Now we still have one more step to do before we can find the value of x. We still need to remove that 2. So this 2 is being multiplied by the absolute value of x because it's right next to the absolute value. So the way we're going to remove that is divide by 2. And what happens when we take out the 2 there, divide by 2, the 2 over 2 makes 1. And 1 times a number doesn't change anything. And so from there, we have to divide by 2 on the right-hand side. We're still left with this absolute value of x, and it equals 5. So from that point, all we have to do is figure out the 2 numbers that make 5, and that would just be 5 and negative 5. And again, we can use those braces to represent the solution. Right, so we've got another type of problem that poses a little bit different situation when we place a number inside the absolute value bars. And that's what we're going to end up experiencing next in part 2 of this lesson.